well, it's the first Marvel video of the new year. Yes. I'm like, yeah, no, it is the first Marvel movie of the new year that I'm reviewing. Although it did come out last year and I watched it on New Year's Eve and it's coming out a couple of weeks later, but we have a review of Spider-Man No Way Home, which is what this is going to be. So, Spider-Man. Wrong way. Sorry. Bad angle. There we go. There's Spidey. Um, and I've got 3 Spider-Man in the background. We got a Spider-Gwen for Gwen Stacy. We got a Miles Morales Spider-Man, and we got a Peter Parker Spider-Man. And to play the part of Doctor Strange, we have Sorcerer Mickey. There you go, Mickey. Stay. Protect. You protect them. They protect you. Got it? Okay. So on New Year's Eve, my dad and I went and saw Spider-Man No Way Home. We both had the day off. Finally got to the, well, he didn't have the day off, but we finally got to the point where we could both go and see it. And as I've stated before, usually I tend to go see Marvel movies and Disney movies, and Pixar movies get thrown in there as well for the first time with my dad. There's been a few differences on that where occasionally I have seen like some of the Harry Potter movies or some of the Star Wars movies for the first time with my mom, simply just because my mom works for the Library Commission here in Nebraska, and she's able to, they used to do these screenings for the movies like within like the first week or two that it came out, and they were like fundraisers for the library, so we would go to those sometimes and different things like that, so they were fun. But we went to go see Spider-Man No Way Home, and as I said, we watched it on New Year's Eve. We went and saw it in the theaters, and when we left the theater, my dad was like, you know, today on Facebook, I saw stuff about Betty White. And I'm like, what happened to Betty White? And he goes, well, she kind of died. And I'm like, sure, tell me that right after we got out of a movie that just tugged at my heartstrings and my childhood. Thank you, Father. So yeah, that was a fun day. And then of course it was New Year's Eve and a whole bunch of other stuff happened. So, in regards to the movie itself, I loved this movie. I'm going to be so happy when I get to see it again when it goes to Blu-ray, or if it goes to Disney Plus first, and then I can watch it with my mom. Oh God, this movie tugged at my heartstrings so many times, and then like it tugged at my childhood, because some of the first Marvel movies I ever saw were the Sony Spider-Man ones with Tobey Maguire. And you know, those came out, you know, rather early on and everything like that in regards to like my introduction to superheroes. I mean, like, I was vaguely aware of, you know, Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman, you know, like the Justice League and the DC stuff, and I was like aware of, you know, Spider-Man for the most part. And I may have been vaguely aware of who Hulk was, but you know, and like in that point in time, like I was, you know, because the Sony Spider-Man movies for Tobey Maguire were coming around the same time that the X-Men movies were. So I was like, okay, so there's also these other X-Men movies, and those are also superheroes. And then they also had the Fantastic Four movies with Chris Evans, and you know the other one with them as a Fantastic Four, and like I saw those, and say what you will about the Fantastic Four ones with Chris Evans, and you know, with them as the characters. The casting I thought was pretty good. The effects weren't bad. Story could be, you know, buffed up a little bit here and there, but I didn't think that they were horrible movies. Side note, I have not seen the other Fantastic Four movies that they made later on that had Michael B. Jordan in them. I have not seen those. And I have also never seen the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man movies, the Amazing Spider-Man movies. Nothing against them. They came out during a time frame when I wasn't paying as much attention to Marvel, or not paying as much attention to Spider-Man. I guess it was also me going like, but I like Tobey Maguire. And then now I'm just kind of like, I'll probably end up watching them. I got the gist of them anyway. I understand like what happens, and I know that there's certain references that get thrown into it, of course, in regards to not only the villains, but also certain things that happen in the movie. So I'm vaguely aware of those. So you know, this movie just kind of like with Toby in there and such, it just kind of like kept pulling at my heartstrings, and you know, you throw in Doc Ock and Green Goblin and such, and I just, you know, let's just talk about it. So, obviously, this movie starts. No Way Home starts at the same point in time where Spider-Man. Far From Home ended with J. Jonah Jameson making this huge announcement on the Daily Bugle, which in regards to the way that they have it played off in this version of it, the Daily Bugle has turned into something along the lines of like InfoWars, with like Alex Jones and things like that. So it's very much this conspiratorial thing that they've built up that's, not really a credible news source, uh, and not really, a good place to actually get your information from. He's that type of a thing. And, he's releasing this video that came from Mysterio, which we, of course, all know is just edited and everything. And that, is Mysterio claiming that, oh, no, Spider Man slash Peter Parker is the one that is to blame for everything that happened in London the other week. And, Spider Man's real identity is Peter Parker. And, of course, that gets blurted out to the entire world. And then, of course, MJ and Peter were going to be on this date. And then that doesn't go well, and he has to end up like swinging her out of there and trying to get her to safety. And then they get back to their house, or get back to the Parker household, where May and Happy are still having a conversation about their relationship, which is just funny watching them have this conversation, this adult conversation about just like maybe not the best relationship, or it's like it was a fling type of a thing. And then Peter shows up and like so many different things are happening, and then it's just like the entire world found out that I'm Spider-Man. I'm sorry. And then, of course, we have this whole bit where it's just like, Peter and the others are all being arrested, and they're all being supposedly, they're all being, investigated and interviewed and interrogated. And like, MJ is just like, nope, I'm not saying nothing. You can't do anything with me. And then, of course, Aunt May is, of course, kind of doing the same thing. She's probably fairly up on her legal things, and the fact that we kind of see her being kind of this very protest, very activist type of a character throughout the course of this Spider-Man series, was having to take care of people like after the blip happened. And we see her working at this place that's called like the Feast something or other, which is like, I'm assuming was kind of here we have a place called Matt Talbot Kitchen and Outreach, which is people who are homeless or near homelessness, very low on the poverty scale, can go and they can get food, and they can sometimes get other things. So I'm assuming Feast is kind of a very similar thing to that. In regards to being able to, get food for people that need food, come here and, maybe they can help in the kitchen or different things like that. So they're, they feel like they're at least helping their community. So I like that they did that with her. That very much seems like an Aunt May thing from this world to do. And so that they're all being interrogated and everything, and Ned gets pulled in and he gets interrogated, and he kind of cracks pretty easily, unfortunately, because he's like, yeah, I was Spider-Man's guy in the chair, so you were his accomplice. I would like a lawyer now. Ned, oh god, Ned. And then of course they do end up getting a lawyer, and it is of course Matt Murdock, who is of course Daredevil, but of course the Parker family and such don't know that he's Daredevil, which is just funny. I have also not seen any of the Netflix Marvel ones yet. I will be watching those soon because I have Netflix now, and I had a few other things I wanted to go watch beforehand, but I will be watching those soon. The Daredevil and Jessica Jones and Luke Cage and Iron Fist and Defenders, and I'll be working my way through all of those at some point in time as well, eventually. And what of course we see happen is, I like how they moment where like Matt Murdock is just like telling Peter, it's like, it's okay, it's like none of your requests, all of their charges are going to be dropped, none of that is going to be going on, but there's still of course the court of public opinion. And of course he's mentioning that, and then out through the window comes this brick that gets thrown, and Peter reaches up to catch it, and then of course Matt Murdock just catches it without looking. And of course he's Daredevil, the audience knows this, Peter doesn't know this, and like everybody is just like, how did you do that? And he goes like, I'm a very good lawyer. I'm like, yes, you are a very good lawyer, I am not arguing with this. And so we get that tie-in, so now we're kind of like canonizing like the stuff that happened in like the Netflix series, because now Marvel has gotten a hold of the rights to be able to use those characters again. So I guess we'll be seeing when like Luke Cage shows up at some point, or Jessica Jones, because I'm hoping they didn't die at the end of their series, and I don't think they did, or I would have heard about that. I think. But we'll see if they show up anywhere. But now we got, Daredevil in there, so we can see what happens with that. And I know that they tried to do like a Daredevil cameo in Hawkeye because, they brought in, uh, oh frick, I know his name. Kingpin. They brought Kingpin into Hawkeye into the series, which I have seen. And of course, as we go through it, Peter goes back to school, and of course MJ and Ned go with him back to school, and of course like we have like Flash trying to pretend like he's been Spider-Man's friend all the time and everything, and writing a book and everything, and of course there's like lots of protesters outside of their school, and there's lots of other things going on. And of course, they're all working on trying to get into the different colleges that they want to go to. And they all want to go to MIT, but they all also apply to some of the same backup schools. So they keep getting their letters, and they're all rejection letters again and again and again and again from all these different schools. And then of course they all get their MIT letter, and of course it's a rejection as well. And of course that's just a lot of things stacked on top of each other. And of course Peter blames himself for the fact that, oh, MJ and Ned are getting into MIT where they deserve to go because of me, because of their association with me. So he, of course, comes up with the idea of going and talking to Doctor Strange, represented here by Fantasia Mickey Mouse, Sorcerer Mickey. And he goes to the Sanctum Sanctorum, and he sees, first of all, the entire place has been covered by like a bunch of snow, and Strange explains it away as like, oh well, some one of the portals opened up upstairs and into like a blizzard, and it covered the entire place in snow and everything like that. So that's just funny there. I think we see these two people in there like shoveling the snow, and Peter and Strange are talking, and Peter is just like keeps calling him sir, and then Strange just goes like, no, we saved the universe together. I think you've earned the right to call me Stephen. I think we've moved past sir. And he goes, okay, Stephen, that's a bit odd, but I'll allow it. And of course, we find out at this point in time that Wong has been named the new Sorcerer Supreme instead of Doctor Strange, simply because I guess this kind of answers one of the questions that I guess we were having, is whether or not Wong got snapped away during the blip. And according to this, he did not, I think was what we learned. Like Wong was not snapped away during the blip. But, Strange was, obviously, because we saw that happen. So Wong has now been promoted to become the new Sorcerer Supreme. So we'll see what that happens, see where that goes with him. And I don't know exactly where this lines up for his timeline in regards to what we see happening in Shang-Chi, but I would assume that it takes place possibly after what happens in Shang-Chi. Obviously it's either before or after, but I don't know exactly which one it is. But we see him in Shang-Chi and the Ten Rings, and like when they're at like the Fight Club, and then at the end of the movie with like the end credit scene. But Peter asked Strange if he would be able to make a spell that would make everybody forget who he is, or forget that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. And Strange is like, well, I can do that and everything. And Wong tries to tell him, don't use the spell, and then he leaves. And then, of course, Strange does decide to use the spell, and they go down into, like, this cavernous basement type thing, and they're working on trying to figure out this spell. And, Strange is getting ready to cast the spell, and he has to start, like, three or four different times, because Peter is just, like, I'll go over this in a second, but Peter is just like, well, yeah, everyone should forget that I'm Spider-Man. Oh, except Aunt May. Aunt May has to remember too, because that was just so hard trying to explain it to her before. Okay, Strange starts over again with the spell. Oh, and MJ and Ned, they need to know too. Okay, and Happy. Yeah, okay, Happy. And like, it's just like one after the other type of a thing. And he has to like restart the spell like 4, 5, 6 times or something like that. And okay, Strange, you could have very easily prevented this from happening by simply asking Peter, okay, so you want people to forget that you're Spider-Man. Understandable. Who don't you want to forget? So I can make sure that that's part of the spell. who should know that you're Spider-Man? And then Peter could have given him the list of, well, obviously my Aunt May, obviously MJ and Ned, obviously Happy, and then all the people who are Avengers, of course, like you and, the people connected to the Avengers, like, Hawkeye and, the people from Wakanda and the rest of the Avengers that are still around and everything like that. Like, they should all still remember that I'm Spider-Man because that's a useful thing to have. And, if Strange had simply just done that, we could have avoided so much of this movie. But Strange didn't, because Strange didn't think about that. And admittedly, it is partially on Peter as well, that Peter didn't say, hey, maybe we should, maybe I should tell you who should know that I'm Spider-Man. But of course, the spells kind of go awry, and it just, it makes things not very good. And then, of course, what ends up happening is, Peter just says, or Strange says, so you're doing all of this. You made me do all of this and mess up this spell simply because you didn't think that you could call the people from MIT to try to see if they could reconsider MJ and Ned. And he kicks them out of the building. And then Peter goes off and he decides, okay, well, I'm just going to try to talk to the people that are in charge of admissions. So he calls Flash and gets the name of the person who's in charge of admissions, and he ends up finding her, and she happens to be on this bridge in her car on her way to the airport. And he's they're trying to talk to her about the fact that, oh, well, MJ and Ned shouldn't be punished for something that I did. Yes, they know that I was Spider-Man, but they aren't part of anything that happened, so you should reconsider their applications. And during this time frame is, of course, when Doc Ock attacks, is, of course, when we have, Dr. Octavius, Otto Octavius pops in, and of course played wonderfully by Alfred Molina, and he starts, smashing cars and all this other stuff, and he starts trying to, grab Peter and pull him away and attack Peter and hurt Peter and all this other stuff. And during this whole time frame, Peter's trying to get people out of their cars and getting them to leave, and he tries to get the woman out of her car so she can try to escape, but that doesn't work, and she's kind of stuck in the car, so she kind of witnesses this fight that happens between Peter and Dr. Octavius and Doc Ock. And they're fighting all over the bridge and everything, parts of the bridge are getting destroyed, of course. And then at one point, Doc Ock's claws reaches out, and they end up grabbing a bunch of the nanites off of Peter's suit. And the nanites, because of course Doc Ock is of course extremely smart anyway, and this is already rather advanced technology that he had been making in his world. The nanites kind of conform to the suit, or the suit nanites conform to the tentacles that Doc Ock has, and they cover the whole thing, and we get a slight redesign, and they get this red tint and highlights and gold on them. And then Peter's wrist acts up, that has his part of the control manual for the suit, and it's just hey, would you like to connect new device? And he's sure. And he pokes it because he's pinned to the wall right now. And that allows him to take over the tentacles. And that allows him to then control the tentacles to prevent Doc Ock from attacking him further. And then of course he uses that to save the woman that was in the car, who's the admissions person, and gets her up on the bridge, and she's safe, and he gets her out of the car. And she tells Peter that, I am going to have them reconsider Ned and MJ's application and your application. Peter's no, just theirs. He's because of course Peter is, I'm sorry, Peter is a Hufflepuff, and so am I. Peter is a Hufflepuff. His loyalty, yes, he is extremely brave. No one is going to deny that, but I think his thing is his loyalty, or at the very least, the Tom Holland version of Spider-Man. His thing is loyalty. Not that he's not brave. Obviously, he's very brave, considering that he goes around and saves people even before he had a proper suit to help with that. And so she's well, no, I'm going to talk to them about your application too. And she leaves, and this is when we see the Goblin bomb show up, and then we see the Green Goblin show up. And within that instance, both Peter and Strange are zapped out of there. Peter and Doc Ock are zapped out of there. And Doc Ock is trapped inside of this magical cage type of a thing with the tentacles kind of like preventing him from really moving because the tentacles are now under Peter's control. So they're kind of like restricting, his movements and everything. And then, of course, we see Strange, and then we see that there's this other thing inside of this other magical cell that looks like a giant lizard. And, Doctor Strange explains, okay, so here's what happened. You made me mess up the spell and restart it a bunch of times. So this is your fault. And these are all people from other universes, multiverse setup. So big Loki reference there. Multiverse setup that all of these people here, a bunch of people came through that know that you are Peter Parker, that know that Spider-Man is Peter Parker. And he's got that. He's got Lizard trapped inside of one of the magic cells, and he's got Doc Ock now trapped, and he's explaining this to Peter, and he like messes and upgrades like part of Peter's like costume with magic, so Peter can then like go out and gather up like the other people who came through from other dimensions, and he's like, okay, well that's not gonna work very well. So he brings in Ned and MJ to help him because like they're very helpful and trying to figure out what's going on and help him track down these characters, these different people that came in from the other universes. And of course during that time frame he has to go off and he ends up fighting Electro, and then he ends up having to deal with Sandman, who of course this is already like universe hopping because Doc Ock and of course Green Goblin are of course both from the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man. Same thing with Flint Marko, who is of course Sandman. And then of course we have Electro, Max Dillon, who is played by Jamie Foxx, and he, at least as he stated, at least he's not blue in this one, so that's helpful. And I do like his design is a bit better in my opinion than what I've seen from like clips and move in like promo art from the Amazing Spider-Man movies. But like he's there and like Peter kind of has to deal with him, and then like Sandman kind of willingly comes with Peter because if I remember correctly, it's been a very long time since I've watched the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies, but if I remember correctly, Sandman, at least to a degree, worked with Peter. I know that Sandman had a bit of an odd past in regards to the fact that I don't think that he was like a bad guy, but I don't think he had like the best life, and like his whole thing is he just wants to get home to his daughter, and of course we get some other bits about that in the movie. That's his main motivation, is of course, and of course the other ones that are straight up villains at the moment, Doc Ock is being kind of manipulated by the tentacles. Goblin of course has the Goblin inside of him. Max Dillon, Electro has this immense amount of electricity running through him that's messing with his brain. Lizard, Kurt Connors, if I remember correctly for his name, like he was of course mutated into a lizard via certain things, and now he thinks the rest of the world needs to be upgraded and evolved, even if it is forcefully, because that's not the right way to do it. So he's being messed with because he's like being influenced by certain things inside of him. So Peter is working on getting the rest of the different a bunch of the others gathered up, and of course this is a reference to like the Sinister Six, of course, from Spider-Man, which I don't remember the exact whole setup for Sinister Six, but I know that Doc Ock and Goblin are usually part of it, and there's several others that are usually part of the Sinister Six that tend to be things that Spider-Man deals with. My nephew possibly could answer that question better than I do, but I don't remember exactly who the other full Sinister Six are, but they are kind of like setting that up or a little bit, or like a bit of like, well, these characters could all be part of the Sinister Six. And these are all people to a degree whose part of their problem, part of why they're the way they are, is partially because of Peter Parker, but also partial because of their own hubris. So there's a bit of a like cross wave there. But like Peter gathers them all up, and then he gets a call from his aunt, and his aunt says, "Hey, one of the guys that that you're looking for has showed up at Feast at work." And Peter is just like running into there trying to find her, and he's just like running through Feast going, "Where's that man?" Like people are just kind of pointing, and like, because I'm assuming they all know who Peter is. Even like before they knew that he was Spider-Man, he was like, he's May's nephew. And like, I think most of them are probably very much on Peter's side because like they've seen what he's done of Spider-Man, they've seen what Aunt May has done. And I think they're mostly like, yeah, no, these guys are on Peter's side. And Peter finds Aunt May, and she's, of course, talking to Norman Osborn, or Green Goblin. But at this point in time, it's Osborn that is in control because he's kind of. Because, like, as of course we've seen, what we of course saw at the end of the Spider-Man, the first Spider-Man movie with Tobey Maguire, which again, it's been a very long time since I've seen it, but I do remember that, in that final fight between Peter, or between Spider-Man and Goblin, the real Norman Osborn kind of came out and kind of, you know, worked enough against Goblin to allow Peter to be able to defeat him. And then, of course, he asked, don't tell Harry, which is, of course, don't tell Harry Osborn, which is, of course, don't tell my son what I've done, who I am, what I've done. And, unfortunately that backfires because, of course, in the second movie, Peter then has to deal with, Harry Osborn as, like, this new version of the Green Goblin, if I remember correctly. So that doesn't go super well, but by this point in time, the rest of the villains have figured out that, oh, well, the last thing I remember when I was fighting against Spider-Man before I came here was it looked like I was about to win, but no, Spider-Man killed me. And of course, Goblin kind of dies of his own hubris. He kind of like somewhere in between of the fact of like Norman Osborn coming out like allows Peter to stop him, and then of course with Doc Ock at the end of the Doc Ock movie for the Tobey Maguire ones at the second one, which I do admit is just one of my favorite Spider-Man superhero movies in general, regardless of whether or not it's DC or whatever, or Marvel or whatever. But at the end of that, with everything that's going on, of course, with Doc Ock, he forcefully becomes in control of the tentacles again, as opposed to letting them manipulate him, and he makes them stop his device that was going to go off and destroy like New York City in his attempt to get like green energy, solar energy, endless energy. And he kind of like came out of that and of course tried to stop it, of course, and he did end up dying in the process, but it wasn't because of Peter killing him. And then of course Sandman is destroyed, I think, in his movie, but I don't remember exactly what happens with it. And then I don't remember if Sandman is in the same movie with Doc Ock or if he's in the same movie with Venom. I don't remember for the Tobey Maguire movies. It's been so long since I've seen them. But we don't see the Tobey Maguire version of Venom in this movie. But we do see a Venom later on at the end, of course. But we see a bunch of that stuff, and the different villains are just like, well, no, Peter killed me. Like the ones that know each other are like recognizing each other. Like, Doc Ock is recognizing this other person, and Electro is recognizing Lizard, and like all this other stuff. And so Peter and Aunt May are like talking because like he sees Norman Osborn and like, okay, so this guy was like a really, really bad villain and everything. And we see Aunt May telling him that, well, he just seems like he needs help. He's not just like lost physically in the sense that he's not where he's supposed to be. He's also lost like mentally and in his soul. And I think that he just needs help, and that I think that you should use this opportunity to try to help him and help the others. And of course, Peter does decide to do this, and he goes back to, the Sanctum Sanctorum and takes Norman Osborn with him, and they go back there, and him and, MJ and Pete, Ned are like talking, and, Strange shows up and he's just like, okay, so you got them all? Yeah. Okay, now we're going to send them all back, and, Strange's mind, it's, send them all back, get them out of here so they're no longer my problem. And so they're no longer a threat to this dimension, this reality, this world. So they're no longer that threat here, but also he's also basically sending them all back to die, because in each of their worlds, as I said, they were each killed by Spider-Man, which is not a good way to send people back, because you're basically sending them back to die, which of course that's not what Peter wants to do. That's not what MJ and Ned want to do either. So of course we get this whole big fight between Peter and Strange, and we do like the astral projection thing that we saw the Ancient One due to Hulk and in Endgame, and like Peter's body keeps like moving on its own, even though Peter is like technically not inside of it, which I'm pretty sure is like a reference to like his spider sense or his Peter tingle as they refer to it as in this world, but his spider sense, and like it just keeps moving on its own, and like Strange is just like, how are you doing that? Peter, I don't know. But like, and then like him and Peter end up having, Strange and Peter have this kind of a fight-ish type, showdown inside of the mirror dimension. And of course, Peter ends up, figuring out that, oh, the mirror dimension is just like this certain type of math equation type of a thing. And he uses that to like entangle Strange inside of his webs. Inside of this web matrix, sealing him inside of there, and like taking his sling ring and like this um, box type thing that is like gonna be used to like send everybody back to where they came from. And like Peter steals that and he tells Strange, and he takes like his sling ring that allows him to like open the portals and everything. And he takes it and he's just like, I'm gonna try to fix them because they deserve that. And he goes back out and like Strange is like trapped in that world, trapped in the mirror dimension. And like Peter gets back and he tells all the different villains, he's like, okay, I'm gonna try to fix all of you. We don't need fixing. Just let me try. And like he sends MJ and Ned off with like the basically the big red button on the box. It's just like, don't touch the button unless I call you and tell you to do it. And like they head off, and like then he takes all the other villains back to his place, where actually him and Aunt May have been living with Happy for the past couple of weeks, months ish or so, because they can't go back to their house, or they can't really go back to their home because of course everything that's going down with everybody finding out that he's Spider-Man and everything, and then of course they keep harassing him and his aunt, so they go to live with Happy. And of course Happy is very much, he's still being a gentleman in this case. Like he still has feelings for May, that's very obvious. And he still cares for Peter. Like he cared for Peter even before he like really got to meet May. Because he sees Tony in Peter. And he wants to like help that flourish. And of course they're living at at Happy's residence, and of course Peter has like all this stuff there that he's able to use, and he starts like, I think it is that we see like Dummy in the background of like Happy's apartment, which is just so adorable. Because I'm just like, no, that would make sense that like he would have Dummy, and then like maybe Pepper has like you and Butterfingers with her and Morgan. After everything that happened with Tony, that would just make sense in my opinion. Or that maybe like they put, like Dummy goes back and forth a little bit. Maybe they have like joint custody of the robots or something. I don't know. But I'm sorry, I'm imagining that in my head now. But like they get to Happy's apartment, and like they're Peter starts working on different devices and different things that he can use to try to help fix each of them. I mean, it's kind of more he wants to help them no longer be affected by like the powers or the different chemicals or whatever that are running through their veins. Electro has like this overabundance of like electricity going in through him that's like going to affect that. Sandman, he's still pretty much mentally there, but he is like physically, literally, like he's basically like Cobra from One Piece if he couldn't like form fully into like this human version of himself, if he was just like stuck in his like sand form the entire time. Which, if he could go back to his regular form and then he could go back home, that would be fine, but he can't really do that very well in this way. And then, of course, Doc Ock has his, the tentacles that are very much still kind of in control of his brain, and like messing with that. And of course, all this other stuff is going on. And during this time frame, we find out that, of course, Peter has been being followed by, just someone that works for the Daily Bugle and has been like, keeping an eye on like Peter and like following him around and everything. So, like, that guy's reporting back to, Jameson and everything. And, Jameson is still doing, like, his, very much conspiratorial things and everything like that. And one of the things that we see is, of course, we get, like, this montage thing of, like, Peter talking to the different characters, like, Aunt May is there helping him as well a little bit at times. And, like, he's, they're talking to, like, the different, the villains and trying to work out, what needs to be done and everything. And, he's like enjoying talking because like at the moment, Osborn is in control. So Osborn is much more on the sane side. And like that version of Osborn actually liked Peter because, of course, the Peter that was in his world was his son Harry's best friend. And he just wanted to, that version of Norman Osborn did not hate Peter Parker because he actually really cared for Peter Parker because, of course, as we see throughout the course of the first Spider-Man movie with Tobey Maguire, he's very much around Peter and Aunt May a whole bunch. He's there for them after what happens with Uncle Ben when Uncle Ben is killed and, all this other stuff. And I'm pretty sure that Peter and Aunt May could have very much just easily asked Norman, and he would have very much just given them like a bunch of money because he cared about them. He liked them. But of course, throughout the course of that movie, we have Peter is developing a Spider-Man, and then of course Osborn is being, slowly kind of taken over more and more by that version of the Green Goblin because of the chemicals that he was, affected with, and unfortunately, inhaled or injected with or whatever it was. I don't remember exactly, but Peter is of course working on different cures for all of them. And first up, he makes something that's going to help Doc Ock. So he makes this thing that's supposed to take over for the chip inside of the tentacles, because like part of the chip that was part of the tentacles that Doc Ock has was supposed to help remain that Doc Ock is the one to control and that the tentacles are not controlling him. So Peter works on making that, and he's the first, he gives it to Doc Ock, and Doc Ock is just like, I don't want this, and then he gets that all set up and on Doc Ock and everything by using the tentacles to make him have to stay still. And Peter, attaches that to him, and he's, for a short time we think something, for like a couple of seconds we're like, okay, either something bad happened or it didn't work. And Otto just goes, it's so quiet. Irony, around me just now went very quiet because our washer just stopped. He's just like, it's quiet. I don't hear the voices anymore, the noise anymore. And that was like supposed to be like stuff from the tentacles that was like kind of controlling him and influencing him. So then he starts working on trying to help, Peter a little bit more. And of course, Peter works on making something that's supposed to go on Electro, that's supposed to like suck out all the extra energy from him, and like a serum that's supposed to help against Lizard, and like all this other stuff, and like this other thing that's supposed to help with like turning, Sandman back to normal, because he like asked each of them kind of what happened to them, and they're able to, answer some of those questions. And of course, things seem to be going well, but then of course something happens, and it's Goblin has actually kind of, come back into control over Osborn, and him and Peter end up having this huge fight, and Lizard escapes and starts attacking stuff, and then like all this other stuff happens, and like Electro starts attacking, and Marco kind of starts attacking, and just things are not going well, and like Doc Ock seems to vanish, and like so there's so many other things that are going on at the same time, and like May tries to escape with like a bunch of the other things that are supposed to help with the other characters, and like some of the other things get like fried that they were using on like Electro and some of the other things. And so we get this whole big kind of like fight sequence inside of like the apartment building. So like Peter is trying to fight against Goblin, but of course a bunch of other things are working on, having to have a problem. Like, the Bugle has showed up, so like they're filming a bunch of this and like showing it all over, the city or whatever at the same time. And of course what ends up happening is, Goblin ends up, Aunt May ends up getting hurt, and she gets hit with like the Goblin glider. And then he also sends in, he throws in like the one of the Goblin bombs, and Peter tries to protect her from that. And of course, that doesn't work. And all of them kind of just like scurry off, and of course the police are showing up, SWAT team is showing up, they're trying to corner Peter, and Aunt May is trying to be strong, and she's trying to not seem like she's hurt, but she was very badly hurt by the what happened from the Green Goblin and everything. And Peter, I actually have like a shirt I think that has Green Goblin on it, but I don't remember where it is. I have a poster over here that has Green Goblin on it, but that's not what that's not what I need right now. Sorry. But so we have the moment where Aunt May is like telling Peter's like, no, I shouldn't have tried to help them, and she's like, no, you should try to help them. Because of course this is of course where we get that, because with great power there is also great responsibility. And of course, now we get that line in this version of Spider-Man, which I don't know if that was in the Tobey, and I know that was of course in the Tobey Maguire movies. That's of course from there, but I don't remember if that was ever in the. I don't know if that was ever in the Andrew Garfield version of the movie, but I think it might have been. Um, but like we see all of this stuff happening, and Peter, Aunt May does die, unfortunately. Like at this point, like Happy's shown up and like he's like looking through the window and like he sees what's going on because all this is kind of like happening in the lobby of the building, and there's like rubble everywhere in the lobby. And I'm sure there's a bunch of people that are gonna need their security deposits back, and aren't gonna be getting them. Um, but of course, Peter is, of course, and this is just one of the moments in the movie where it's just like, okay, we're gonna tug at your freaking heartstrings for right now, and we're gonna make you just like cry your eyes out, which I kind of did. And Peter, Aunt May clearly dies, and he goes off. Peter runs off, and during this time frame, MJ and Ned, are seeing part of this being, shown on the TV. And what ends up happening is they're just like, we need to go find Peter. We need to figure out what happened to him. And Ned kind of realizes that he can like activate the sling ring, and he's like, I wish we could see Peter, and like he moves his hand around, and it sparks, and there's a portal that opens up, and in walks a guy dressed as Spider-Man, and they're just like, wait a second, that's not the right costume. And he takes off of his, he takes the helm, the mask off, and it's the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man, Andrew Garfield Peter Parker. And they're just like, wait a second, you're not Peter. Yeah, I am Peter Parker. No, you're not. You're not our Peter Parker. And like, so we get this whole, scene there, and he's just like, well, prove that you're Peter Parker. How do we do that? I don't know. So he just like sticks himself to the ceiling, and then like they're at Ned's house, so Ned's grandma is like there, and she's just like watching this happen. And like the portal eventually closes in the background where they're like messing around, talking to the Andrew Garfield Peter Parker, and this Peter is just like Ned's grandma like says in like whatever her language is. I don't remember. I know it's not Spanish, but I don't remember exactly what the language is. But he's like, my grandma said asked if you could get the spider webs that was in the corner, and Peter, the Andrew Garfield Peter, is just like, okay, and he like sticks himself to the ceiling and crawls over and like gets the spider web and then comes back down. It's just like, okay, well obviously you are Peter, you have the same powers, so but you're not our Peter. So they try it again, and then of course in walks this like rather normal looking guy, and it's Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man. But he's not in the spider suit, he's just like in like regular clothes. And like both of them like both of the Spider-Men kind of like attack each other and like shoot their webs at each other, which is just kind of funny. And so we're getting all of that moment going on, and at one point the grandma's just like, Ned's like, my grandma's like, can you clean up your spider webs? And he's like, oh yeah, and like they both start cleaning up like the little messes that they made with the spider webs and like picking up the spider webs, which is just kind of funny in and of itself. And then like both of the other Peters are just like, well, where is there a place? Is there a place where Peter goes where he can think? And like one of them's like, well, I use the top of the Empire State Building. Oh yeah, I use the Chrysler Building, or whichever ones it is. And like, oh well, we know where that Peter might be. So they go to the school, which is of course where we see Peter, and he's sitting up there on the roof, just like thinking and like crying and just like so heartbroken. And like Ned and MJ hug him, and like they try to comfort him, and I think at this point in time they figured out that yeah, Aunt May died. And then they're just like, Peter, there's some people here I think that need to talk to you. And they down from the top of the building hop both of the new Spider-Men, showing that okay, they have the same powers type of a thing. So it's like all three of them like seeing each other face to face, and it is kind of like the Spider-Man meme where they're all pointing at each other. Not quite that, but that does happen to a degree. So they all are like interacting with each other, and like kind of like the proving things, and like the moments where you're getting some comparisons and everything. And Peter's like, my Tom Holland Peter is just like, my Aunt May said, with great power, and then Tobey Maguire Spider-Man comes great responsibility. How do you know that? Because my Aunt Ben, my Uncle Ben told me the same thing right before he died. And like, we're getting all of that kind of like so they are very similar. And they're just like, okay, well, car drive past. And all of them are just like, okay, well, we got to find a way to fix this. We got to find a way to stop all of them. But I know how to like change them all back. And like, of course, both of the other Peters, because that's one of Peter Parker's thing, is that not only does he have like the spider powers, he also is extremely intelligent. Most versions of Peter Parker are usually very, very intelligent, one way or the other. Some a bit more so than others, but you get the idea. And particularly in like into the Spider Verse type of thing going on there, which I'm gonna be so happy for like across the Spider Verse. That looks so fun. Gwen Stacy, Spider Man, Spider Woman, and of course what we see end up happening is of course all of them are working together, and like Toby Maguire Spider Man is just like, oh yeah, no, I've been working on a thing a long time to be able to fix Norman, and Andrew Garfield is like, yeah, no, I think I know how to fix Electro and Lizard, and like they're working on that inside of the school's laboratory, which surprisingly enough has everything that they need, I guess. I mean, like Peter still has like the base devices that he had made that like Aunt May had grabbed and such that were supposed to be able to help turn the others back. So they're all working on those and getting those chemicals mixed up and things designed and everything. And like MJ and Ned are like watching in the background, and like Ned goes and talks to Tobey Maguire Spider Man, I believe, and he asks, "So, do you have a best friend?" Yeah, I did. And then he tried to kill me. And then like MJ or Ned is just like, oh god, and he like goes off, which is I think a reference to the fact. Well, of course, obviously for Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, that's the straight up reference to Harry Osborn for what happens in the second Spider-Man movie. But in regards to Ned is, I believe, based off of a character from the comics that does at some point become a villain, but I could be wrong on that one. I don't remember exactly, but I think he's based off of someone that does become a villain in the comics. Because I know in the comics that like Flash Thompson became like became Rhino, I think, at some point, and I could be wrong on that one. Um, so we get like lots of references with that. But like Ned like tells Peter like tells his Peter Tom Holland Peter, yeah, and I promise I'll never turn into a supervillain and try to kill you, Peter. Okay. And then of course we have Andrew Garfield Spider Man is like watching as like MJ and Peter from Tom Holland Peter are kind of like talking and everything, and like we see Andrew Garfield Spider Man looking rather sad, of course, because like his Gwen Stacy is no longer around. He didn't have an MJ, but like he asked Tobey Maguire Spider Man about well what happened with um how do you do it with like your relationship, and Peter's like, and Tobey Maguire Spider Man's just like, well, it took a lot of work, and but eventually MJ, my MJ, different MJ, um um eventually we did kind of get to the point where we could work with it, and we're happy, but we still have to work for it. And different versions of Peter and MJ. I mean, like throughout the whole comics, Peter has had a bunch of different love interests. There's MJ, of course. There's Gwen Stacy. Those are the biggest ones. There's also like a Black Cat. There's also, I think there's a character called Silk that also has like spider powers. There's a bunch of different versions of different romantic interests that Spider-Man has had. And if I remember correctly from stuff I've seen in the comics, Miles Morales Spider-Man, I think, is actually at one point was in a relationship with like the Gwen Stacy Spider-Man. I think I could be wrong on that, but I think that that's what happened, and I think that's what they're kind of going to be showing in like across the Spider-Verse movie. I think that's going to be what they're going to be showing on that one too at some point. But of course, what we see end up happening with a bunch of the different the characters are all interacting with each other and kind of like finding out things about like, oh, their past, but also this past, but also what happened with us, and like they all get the devices ready, and then Peter sends out like a call to where calls into the Daily Bugle, and he's just like, okay, so for all the for all the people that came here, and I'm sorry that I'm causing all this trouble is because of me. I'll be at the Statue of Liberty if you want to try to if you want to try and come after me. And of course, the three Peters are at the Statue of Liberty, and like they're all talking and everything. Like we're getting a scene where like Toby Maguire's like trying to stretch out his back, and like Andrew Garfield just like, you got back problems? Yeah, I think it's from all the web slinging, from all the the swinging around and everything. It's just like, oh, you want me to crack your back? So it's like it's like they're just having like fun bonding moments that are just like, yeah. I mean, like for Toby Maguire, it's been almost 20 years since he played Spider-Man. Um, I mean, 15 going on 20 years since he played Spider-Man, and it's not like he hasn't done like some action thing since then, but that was his main thing, was that like his action movies were the Spider-Man movies. And so it's been a while. um but like him and Andrew are just like bonding that way, and of course like the three of them are all talking, and like the Andrew Garfield is just like I I've always wanted brothers, I never had brothers, and like I love you guys, and like the others, thanks. And like we get all this fun moments there with all of them. And they're all they're all ready to start to fight against the different villains as they show up. And of course the villains show up, and during this time frame they tried to send like the blow everything up and send everybody back home box, back to MJ and Ned, and they were supposed to hold on to it, but they couldn't get the portal to close, so that doesn't work. um and they can't get the portal to close, so that's just one of the running things that's going on. And like they end up having to get chased around by some of the villains. And of course, at first, we do get the great scene where like all three of the Spider-Man all land next to each other, and I think it does go it goes Tobey Maguire Spider-Man first, then Andrew Garfield, then Tom Holland Spider-Man. And it's like not like it's like best to worst or anything like that, but it's just like Andrew was, or Toby was first, then Andrew, then Tom, in regards to just like chronologically, that's the way that it went. And so we get those moments, and of course that's just great to watch. And of course we see them, and they're all trying to fight against the different villains and everything, and it's just like, oh well, you're our actual Spider-Man or our actual Peter Parker, so let's see what we can do here. And they don't work together super well at first, and then of course they end up having like this, they have to regroup real quick, and they're just like, okay, so I've the other two Spider-Men that are Tom Holland, they haven't really worked in a team before, but Peter is just like, yeah, I've worked in a team before, I've part of the Avengers. And they're like, that's great, what is that? Is that like a boy band or something? Like that's just hilarious. Just like, no, it was a team of superheroes, we saved the world from I fought in space and fought against a purple alien. I'm still trying to get over the fact that you fought in space. Just like all this other fun stuff that happens. And it's just like, okay, Peter, or it's like, okay, Peter 1, Peter 1 is Tom Holland. Peter 2 is, which one was Peter 2? One of them is Peter 2. And then the part of the Osborn universe, the Tobey Maguire one is Peter 2. And then I think Peter 3 is the one that is the Peter 3 is, I think, Andrew Garfield. So I think they did that way. I think that's what it ended up being. But like, so it's just like, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna, focus on one villain at a time. It's like they slowly start whittling them down. Like they get Lizard, and they like, who's like chasing like MJ and Ned through the building and everything, and like they get Lizard, and Lizard, they get Lizard, and they like send, set off his cure, like it turns him back. And then like they get Sandman, and like they pin him, and like they get him changed back into normal, so he's no longer turning into sand all the time. And Electro and Green Goblin are the two of the more main threats that are there at the time frame. So what ends up happening is Doc Ock shows up, and like he pretends like he's on the villain's side, but then he grabs, because Electro had grabbed one of the arc reactors that Tony had, that had been at Happy's house. He had grabbed one of the arc reactors and was using that to power himself. And Doc Ock ends up like trying to grab that off of him, and then like one of the Peters jabs on like this electric converter thing or something that's supposed to like absorb a ton of the different extra electricity that's inside of him. And like that works, and like it pulls all that out of him, so he's kind of goes back to normal. And then like Doc Ock is like now kind of on their side, so they're just kind of like the different Peters are like interacting with their different villains a little bit. And like MJ and Ned had gotten like chased around at one point all over the Statue of Liberty, which for some reason they're attaching a giant version of the Captain America shield to because reasons, and I don't think that that's the best idea. Um, but yeah, whatever. And what ends up happening is, of course, at some point in this time frame where they're running around, one of the portals ends up opening again into Doctor Strange, and he comes out of the mirror dimension, and he's just like, I have been hanging over the Grand Canyon for 12 hours, which is, of course, a reference back to Loki. That is, I have been falling for 30 minutes, and, like all that fun stuff. And, like, he grabs the sling ring, and he's just like, how are you able to use this? Ned, I just was. Just like, and like he takes the box and he's ready to like push the box and activate it to send everybody back. But I'm just like, no, look, stop. He's actually like curing them. And like he, Strange sees what's going on. And what ends up happening is, of course, kind of the last one, of course, that they have to deal with is Green Goblin. And, he shows up and he's kind of like, buffed up his ride to a degree. And him and Tom Holland Peter basically get into kind of a no holds bar fight where they're just kind of, beating on each other and fighting against each other and everything like that. And, because Peter, of course, sees him and he just sees the person that killed his aunt. That is the reason his aunt is dead. And, we get this whole fight scene that happens there between them, of course. And then, of course, what ends up happening is, I think it is the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, which makes sense, is that he comes along or wait, no, which one is it? I don't remember. But no, it's the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man that comes along, and Goblin was about to stab Tom Holland Spider-Man, but Goblin ended up stabbing Tobey Maguire Spider-Man because he like jumped in front of it to protect Peter 1. And during this whole time frame, when this whole battle is going on, MJ falls, and like Tom Holland Spider-Man during part of this whole thing had tried to catch her, but he wasn't fast enough. But Andrew Garfield Spider-Man was able to catch her, and we just see him just because, of course, and this happened in the comics, and this happened in the Andrew Garfield, the second Spider-Man movie with him, the second Amazing Spider-Man movie, because in that movie, Gwen Stacy, who is his love interest in that, she falls, and Peter tries to catch her, and in the course of catching her, he accidentally, her head hits the cement. And in the comics, it's like her neck snaps or something like that from the force of like being stopped in the fall. But both times she dies. And like that version of Spider-Man, or the Spider-Man at that time, that just like breaks their heart, and like they can't continue being a hero, or it takes them a little while to go back to being a hero. And of course, this version of the Andrew Garfield version is the one that lost his Gwen Stacy, lost his love because of him being Spider-Man. And like he wasn't going to let one of his new friends, he wasn't going to let this other Peter go through that with this MJ. So he still catches her and saves her. And like he's just kind of crying, and I'm sure that kind of brought back like, some of the latent memories and everything in regards to like the character, obviously, but also to a degree of the actor, because I'm sure that scene, like in the movie itself, was not easy to film for the actor. Depending on certain things, some scenes, even like involving like death scenes and stuff like that, are sometimes not the easiest to film. It just depends on the character and the actor, I guess. But so he saved MJ, and then of course Tom Holland Peter's fighting against Green Goblin, and of course Tobey Maguire Spider-Man gets stabbed. And what ends up happening is all three of the Spider-Men end up getting the cure into Green Goblin and like stabbing that into his neck to get him get Green Goblin out of Osborn and get Osborn back in control. And he sees what he did. He sees that he hurt the Peter Parker that was his son's best friend, and he sees all this other stuff. And at this point, Peter jumps up to where Strange is, and Strange is, because during this whole fight, all of these different cracks all over the universe, like all around New York, have been starting to show up, like cracks like in the world and in the sky start to show up. And Peter is just like, what's going on? And Strange is just like, there's a bunch of people coming from the other universes that know about Peter Parker being Spider-Man. Some good, some bad, but a lot of them are probably going to be bad, and they're trying to come through. And we need, I can only do so much to try to stop them. So Peter is just like, then just make everybody forget. Do what the spell was originally supposed to do, and just make everyone forget that I am Spider-Man. Just everyone. And Strange kind of looks at him, and he's just like, if I do that, it's going to make everyone that loves you is going to forget about you. We will all forget about you. Which, obviously, that's supposed to be something that he's supposed to say, because that's supposed to imply that Strange does very much care about Peter. I mean, like, he hasn't known him very long, but the kid has obviously proved himself to Strange. In the short time that they've known each other, in regards to, with Infinity War, and then, at the end of Endgame and everything, and now even with this, he's, like, proved himself to Strange. And Strange even says something along the lines of, like, as I stated at the beginning of this, Strange could have very easily, like, prevented a bunch of this from happening by just simply asking Peter, okay, I get that you want most of the people to forget about you. Who don't you want to forget about you? That would have saved so much time and so much heartbreak. But, like, so Peter is just like, okay, well, just make everybody forget who I am. And Strange is like, okay, I can do that. And he starts working on the spell that's going to, make everybody forget who Peter Parker is, but it will also send everybody else back that came from the other world, from the other universes, and it should also close up all of the different, cracks in the universe that are coming. And, he goes down and he says goodbye to, the other two Peters, and, they all hug and everything, which is just, oh God, the heartstrings and everything. And, they're all ready to go back to their universes, and he goes over and he talks to MJ and Ned, and he's just like, when this is done, neither of you are going to remember who I am, and I'm sorry, but I will find you, and we will be friends again. And, like, we go through all of the, he gets, the sad, heart-wrenching goodbye to Ned, who's of course his best friend, and to MJ, who is of course his girlfriend, and, is also his friend in and of itself. And so we get that moment, and he's, saying goodbye to them, and he even, like, says goodbye to, like, Strange, and, like, Strange, does the spell to, make everybody forget. And he sends them all back, and, all the different, the different villains and the Peters are all, like, glowing and fading out. So they're going back to their world. Whether or not that means they will now be able to, like, 100% change what happened in their world is a little bit left up for debate, but I don't know. Either way, they kind of each got conclusions to their own story, which is nice. And Peter, of course, ends up dashing off. And what ends up happening is, of course, all of the different, everybody does forget about him. And, like, we cut to, I guess, like, a very short time later, because, we see, J. Jonah Jameson being angry again about the fact of, like, Spider-Man needs to reveal himself to the world. He's a masked menace type of thing. And, that's what Peter's having to go through. And, like, Peter now just literally does not exist. Nobody knows who Peter Parker is. Happy doesn't remember who he is. MJ and Ned don't remember who he is. He, Aunt May's dead, so it's not like she can remember who he is anyway, but, he goes to where her grave is, and, like, he says goodbye to her, and he's happy there, and, like, Happy has no idea who he is. And, so we see that, and of course then he goes to the coffee shop where, like, MJ works, and, like, he goes in and he tries to see if he can, like, I guess maybe, like, trigger something in their memory for MJ and Ned. But that doesn't work. And, he decides that he's just gonna, I guess, kind of, he's, like, encouraging them, of course, to, have fun at MIT and be really good at what they do. And he ends up going off on his own, and he moves into his own apartment, very small, very, very small apartment. And, he has to work now. He has to work towards his own GED, because now, like, none of his school records exist anymore. So he has to literally just work his way towards something new. Because, like, before that, he was, like, on his way to hopefully going to MIT, and, like, he had all these, amazing grades and, all this other stuff. But now he's, like, nothing again. He's nobody. But he's still Spider-Man. And, of course, he makes himself a new Spider-Man suit that is now more of the more bright red and blue colors, the more bright red and blue colors that were for that the other two Spider-Man have. So it's much more of like that type of a reference, and he's still swinging around, saving people and everything. And we did have an adorable moment in the movie, and I kind of forgot about this, but we did have a moment where like all the Peters were talking to her and just like, "Are your web slingers all full?" And I was like, "Andrew and Tom, yep." Toby, what webs? What do you mean cartridges? What's that? And I was just like, "Oh, well, we have cartridges that we used to sling our webs out of." And they're like, "Don't you have that?" And he goes, and he just like comes out of his own wrist, and they're just like, "Oh my god, that's so cool!" And it's just like, yeah, how does that work? And we get the whole funny explanation. I was just like, I've tried not to think about it, not the only place you can shoot webs from. We're not going to talk about that. That was funny. But Peter is of course still being Spider-Man, and he's still out saving people and everything, and honoring her mantra and continuing to do his community service and responsibility that he can do with his, the great power that he has been given, is the great responsibility that he will use it for. And so we see all of that. And of course, we do get a mid-credit scene that is Eddie Brock and Venom, of course, are like down in like Mexico talking to this random like bartender guy who's like explaining to them like basically what happened with the Avengers and what happened with Thanos and the blip and all this other stuff. And like Eddie, and like it took me a second to figure out that it was Eddie Brock. To figure out that it was Tom Harding, Eddie Brock, because I'm sitting there going like, wait a second, because like he's like he's wearing like colorful clothes and he has like a hat on, and he's like sitting there and then I hear like this very deep voice and I'm just like, what the heck? And then it's just like, oh, it's Venom and him, duh. I also have not seen either of the Venom or Venom, There Will Be Carnage. I haven't seen either one of those yet. I'll probably end up watching those soon, but I just haven't yet. So it's just like a whole thing of just like, oh my god, now there's that, and like they get zapped out of there at the same time that everybody else does, but there's like a little tiny piece of like Venom symbiote that gets left behind. And I mean, like, they didn't bring in the Eddie Brock that was from the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, which was played by Topher Grace. They didn't bring him in. That was in the third Spider-Man movie where they had Venom in that one. I don't 100% know why, but I guess they just didn't. I'm like, story-wise, I don't know why they didn't. In real life, it was like, well, probably Topher Grace didn't want to come back and play the character. And, the Spider-Man, 3 out of the Tobey Maguire movies isn't really like isn't like considered to be the best one, but they still brought, I think Sandman was in that one. I don't remember if he was in that one or two. I apologize. But like, so we get all of that and everything. And of course, there wasn't an end credit scene, but there was like trailer. There's the trailer for, Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness, which has, of course, Wanda in it, and it looks like it's going to be amazing. But of course, then of course we get the casting. Of course, we have, of course, Tom Holland as Peter Parker / Spider-Man. We have Zendaya, of course, as Michelle Jones Watson. We have Benedict Cumberbatch, of course, as Stephen Strange / Doctor Strange. We have Jacob Batalon as Ned Leeds. We of course have Jon Favreau, of course, as Happy. We of course have Jamie Foxx as Max Dillon / Electro. We have William Dafoe, of course, as Norman Osborn / Green Goblin. We of course have Alfred Molina as, of course, Dr. Octavius / Dr. Octopus / Doc Ock. We of course Benedict Wong as Wong. We have Tony Revolori, I remember, as Flash Thompson. Don't really care. We have, of course, Marissa Tomei, of course, as Aunt May, as May Parker. We, of course, have Andrew Garfield as Peter Parker / Spider-Man. We, of course, as Tobey Maguire as Peter Parker / Spider-Man. And, of course, we have J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson, who, of course, played him in the Tobey Maguire movies. We have Reyes Ifans as Kurt Connor / Lizard, which, I mean, like, he's not as extremely big as the rest of the characters in the movie in regards to like Peter's interaction with him, but he's still there. And I was trying to figure out when he like came through, like when you see him like change back, I'm like, his face looks vaguely familiar. So I had to like Google him, and I think I've found out that he plays Little Lovegood's father in both of the Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows movies, if I remember correctly. And then of course we have Charlie Cox as Matt Murdock / Daredevil, even though he's not playing Daredevil in this. He is Matt Murdock. I'm also familiar with him from a movie that is called Stardust, that he plays like this romantic lead in the movie, and it's really fun, and it's a Neil Gaiman movie, so go watch that. It's fun. And then of course we have Thomas Hayden Church as Flint Marko / Sandman. And of course, we had like Eddie Brock, Tom Hardy show up as like Eddie Brock / Venom. I love this movie. I thought this movie was so good. It just, it's just like, let's just tug at your heartstrings and your childhood and just be like, oh dear God, please just stop for a minute. My heart can't take it anymore. My emotions are going up and down. Um, I loved it. I'm gonna love, whatever point in time they release anything like making of stuff on like either Disney Plus or if I, when I get the Blu-ray, I'm gonna watch all the bonus features, of course, on it because I love doing that, and, like seeing the behind the scenes stuff and like all this filming and everything like that, and just like the different, the actors have said, it's like, yeah, we wanted, we like to come back and play the characters, of course, and I think all three of the, I think Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield just like jumped at the chance to be able to play Spider-Man again, and I just, it just made me so happy when I saw that they were going to be, I had the girl that I work with who had seen it before I had, and I wasn't like fishing for spoilers or anything like that, but I'd asked her like, okay, so is the with great power comes great responsibility, is that in the movie? And she goes, yes. And I went, by some chance, is there like a weird roundabout way that it's Ben Parker that says it? And she goes, no. I'm like, okay. And then I'm like, also, are Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield in the movie, just in it at all? And she goes, yes. And I go, okay. Are they in it for more than like an end credit scene or something? And she's like, yes. And I'm like, okay. I didn't really need too much more than that, but I at least wanted to, like, I was like, for everything that I was seeing at that point in time, I mean, like, I tried to avoid spoilers, and I hadn't watched any other reviews of the movie, obviously, because I don't want to do that until I've seen the movie. But I really, she was like very careful in what she told me, and I was very careful in how I worded my questions, so I didn't get like stuff that I didn't want to know yet. Because I was like, I don't want to know exactly what happens. I just wanted to know whether or not they were in the movie. And she's like, okay, yeah, they are. Okay, that works. So that's what we have. Sorry, that this video took a bit longer than I thought it would. Sorry. So there we go. That's my review for Spider-Man No Way Home. I loved it. I thought it was great. Definitely going to be up there at some point in like some of my top Marvel movies in regards to this for the MCU. But I thank you very much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed the video, and I hope that you have a nice rest of your day. Bye. You have a gift. You have power. And with great power, there must also come great responsibility.